Mainstream fashion weeks are specifically capitalistic and commercial. They are created to sell fashion. And that really just goes against my personal values, but also I believe our community's values of who we are as a people.
Tanse, hello, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Olette Stonechild, and I'm super excited to have Sage Paul here with me today. She is an Indigenous fashion and costume designer and artist whose work is in an incredible showcase of tradition and modern design. She's been recognized around the world for her intentional use of traditional textiles and designs, and she has her nonprofit, Toronto Indigenous Fashion Arts, which will be showcasing a bunch of Indigenous designs this May 30th to June 2nd. Did I get that right?
Right. Yeah, May 30th to June 2nd. And we just announced our location at the Eaton Centre.
Okay. Is that where the fashion show is happening too?
Yeah, and I'm very excited because we were able to get them to do our shows after hours. And it was very specific for that reason, because I don't want our work to be aligned with commercial fashion and like cheapened. So they were like, yeah, do your shows after hours. So it's going to be an experience unlike anything I've ever
I was going to say, like, I wouldn't go into the Eaton Centre normally and think of Indigenous fashion. So it's kind of like this polarized concept, but it's cool that they're integrating and supporting Indigenous designs. I guess first question, how did that come to be? And also, how did Toronto Indigenous Fashion Arts come to be?
I'll start with how we started at Indigenous Fashion Arts. I was doing a lot of work in fashion and I myself as a designer, and I just wanted to have a space where I could present my work. As an Indigenous person, a place that was culturally relevant, a space where my peers were a part of it. You know, I've always felt like such an outsider in the fashion world, and it's been really fulfilling and rewarding to be able to get to do the work that I love with my community. So I was doing all this work, and then I just remembered this the other day. I was sitting at the Namiraz powwow, and I had just finished this big project with IKEA Canada, and it was more around creation, but it was still with another partner. And I was at the Namiraz powwow, and my friend and advisor and mentor, Carrie Swanson, was just like, what are you working on? And I was like, well, actually, I've been thinking about doing an Indigenous Fashion Week. And when we first started, it was called Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto. And she was like, yeah, I want to help. And she is brilliant. So just to have her support, really help to kickstart what IFA is today, Indigenous Fashion Arts. And it's just blown up. And I think that's just a testament to the need and the importance of spaces like this. And we can see them across the country, across the world, that these spaces are being created for us. To get into the Eaton Centre, I do a lot of work to center Indigenous fashion within the context of art, to really give it meaning, to give it value. It's an original site of exhibition, especially for a lot of our communities. And so in 2022, after our festival at Harbourfront, we were actually supposed to go to the Art Gallery of Ontario. Mm-hmm. And there were just some unfortunate events that happened that just led us and myself too, to see that they just are not ready to be working with Indigenous people. There was very blatant acts of racism and oppression that I just did not want our community to have to be confronted with. And that was only 8 months out of the festival, which we give ourselves 2 years to plan for our festival. So it was kind of worrisome. And I was like, where are we going to go? Somewhere that's big enough? You know, we program, we bring in over 100 Indigenous artists and designers. So we need it to be big enough, the audiences, and it's like, let's do the Eaton Centre. And, it was just like this big dream, right? So I just reached out, just contact everywhere, anywhere I could find to try to reach Cadillac Fairview and the people who were running them all. And I finally got a call back. We had all of my friends and collaborators reaching out, and it's like, hey, this is the idea. Because, it's not like we were presenting an idea to be like, it'll be a cool little mall. Remember Backstreet Boys would do their little mall appearance?
Oh, yeah.
We're it's not like that. This is a major production. We're bringing in a whole truss with lighting, our set design, where you have 1,000 tickets. So we're bringing 500 chairs, which we have to put out. So then we were able to make it after hours. And they were like, okay, we see why it has to be that for the many logistical and artistic reasons. And that's how we ended up at Eaton Centre.
And for the listeners that may not know what IFA is even about, could you give them kind of like a little bit of context of who you are and what's your mission, why it's important?
Yes. Oh, thank you for bringing me back.
Oh, no worries. That's my job.
Jump in.
That's my job to
do. Indigenous Fashion Arts. We're a nonprofit. We work with and for our community, working in fashion, craft, and textiles, with a focus on creating spaces for our community, on innovation in the way that we're presenting fashion, in the way that we see fashion sector development, because the idea of fashion is kind of new within this like industry kind of approach, right? So looking at ways that we can develop and innovate and create space for our community members. And we want to do that in a way that aligns fashion. Well, it is at the intersection of like mainstream fashion, but also Indigenous art and also our traditional practices. So those are the guiding things for me. And our vision is to create an evolutionary movement that is led by our community for our communities in fashion. Our festival is our biggest project. It has runways. We have a marketplace. It's like 77 vendors. We do a panel series of. It's all from an Indigenous perspective. So looking at the idea of fashion in art galleries, for example, we're bringing in Wanda Nanabush, who is a curator, but also a previous curator at the AGO. So it's like, what is Indigenous fashion in galleries? So we can have those really hard conversations. So we also do hands-on workshops. We're bringing in Matthew Nukinik. Probably saying his last name wrong, but he's a very famous Inuit artist.
Well, that was kind of like what I was also just thinking of, because to be honest, I'm never drawn to like the mainstream fashion weeks. Like I've never gone to New York Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Week. It's just not, I don't know. I don't see myself represented in, so I don't feel called to go to those fashion weeks. So how would you say like IFA is different than like your mainstream fashion week?
Oh, it's so different. And it starts from the collections. Just for context, mainstream fashion weeks are specifically capitalistic and commercial. They are created to sell fashion to buyers. And so that's why they're exclusive, because you're inviting in buyers, you're inviting in media who are only allowed to be at these top-end shows with these huge celebrities. And that really just goes against my personal values, but also I believe our community's values of who we are as a people. So for us, we start with the designer's works. And if you talk to designers, you'll learn the stories and the meaning behind the work that they're creating. There's usually a lot that goes into it, whether it is like a cultural form of expression or whether it's an individual form of expression. But there is a lot of meaning that goes into that work. So for us, what we do is we put out a call for applications and we get hundreds of applications in, and then we review it with a curatorial team. That includes myself, Wanda Nanabush, and Melanie Egan at the Harbourfront Centre to really look at the stories and how are they all woven together. So we come up with these themes like fierce and fearless this year, and we've got from this ground we grow. And so these themes are speaking directly to each of those designers' vision that they have within their work. And then from there, we start producing the runway shows. And so we produce a script so that people who usually work in theater or dance, they usually start with a script. So them starting from fashion is kind of like, what are we doing? They're used to having fashion put on them and made for them in their specific size. We're like, no, the fashion is the center here. So we create a script so we can build out the beautiful set design, a beautiful lighting design. We work with choreographers to talk, like really inform what is that movement and how does this help to support the collections that are being presented. And then we bring in all of our performers. And so this is another thing, is because it's centered around the fashion that the designers have already made, we have to fit the collections to what the designers have made. And of course, many of the designers that we work with are producing collections in sizing that are made for their family members, that are made for their community members. So we're also not working within industry model sizes. And I think a lot of people see that when they see fashion, they see the models and they see what that is. But for us, it's so vast. We're working with Indigenous people from so many different nations with so many different body shapes and so many different lived experiences experiences. So the models that we end up seeing on the stage, including yourself, are just, it's so incredible to see the diversity of our community and the way that they bring that work to life.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, I modeled a couple years ago in the last show, and I did feel like there was a lot of storytelling woven without it. It also wasn't like your traditional runway walk either. We could have like fun with it. So you also got to see more like life, I feel. And as you were talking about IFA, I started to see some of the values that you have. One, I think, is centered around sustainability. Two, inclusivity with the sizing, and then diversity of the models. Is there any other values you think that Indigenous fashion really has that speaks to who we are as Indigenous people?
Well, for sure, there's such a connection to, how do I say it? A cultural continuity, you know, those stories that we see existing in different forms. So like on screen, right? Like we're starting to see our traditional stories told in like modern ways. And I'm really starting to see that also in fashion, you know, in the way that we are creating our work and the way that it's being presented. Cultural integrity, I think, is a really strong, important value. And we can see that that's what makes our fashion distinctly different from mainstream fashion, especially that which is appropriated, right? Because our value is to have cultural relevancy and integrity and continuity, whereas which is being appropriated is just stolen and has no meaning or depth in the work that's being created.
As a costume designer, how do you maintain cultural integrity and tradition within a system? Fashion industry is usually not those things. So how do you make sure you're living in integrity with those values?
It's a lot of work. You know, it really means taking things slowly. For IFA and even for my own work, I do take a lot of time. We have 2 years in between each festival. This allows time for designers to be able to produce the work that they want to do and also like engage in the consultation, continue to maintain the relationships with important knowledge keepers and maybe their elders. There is a lot of protocol that needs to be followed to maintain that integrity and maintain those connections for where you come from, and especially if that is what you publicly stand for. If you're publicly standing for certain values within your own culture, you have to be connected to those people in your community and your family members that fill you with that knowledge.
Yeah, Asha and I were just talking about this before this, kind of dismantling like the colonized mind. But a part of me also taking on that programming is feeling like I need to produce constantly, or I need to be doing something constantly. And so I love that you take 2 years in between, because that's not something you normally see in the fashion industry at all.
No.
And so how do you first like maintain that balance? And what does that look like on maybe like a daily ritual routine? What are some of your things that kind of like bring you back into balance?
On a daily basis, oh man, it's so hard to say right now because we're only we're 6 weeks away from the festival. So right now I'm completely not in balance. So when I'm in production mode, it is really intense. Yeah, right. It is a lot of work and having to prepare for that. But then on that end too, is like, because I do work with a team, is how do I maintain that grounding with my team? And so we do a lot of work to make sure that everyone is feeling comfortable and that they are feeling like we are moving forward in good ways, and not even just what we're presenting to publicly, but how we interact with each other on a daily basis. So that becomes a part of our process. And so with my team specifically, what we're doing, like on Fridays, we do a little bit like a wellness check-in.
Yeah.
And it can become culturally specific in what we're talking about, but sometimes it's just like, what are you happy about this week? You know, it's really about reflecting on our accomplishments and our achievements. And I think especially as Indigenous people, we are faced with so many oppressions and barriers, and it's really hard to overcome those hurdles. And so really trying to find time, like distinct time when we can recognize each other and the achievements that we are overcoming. It can be really, really big, or even just like, I brushed my teeth today and I'm proud of that, so it really is ranges across. I do take a lot of time to make sure I'm spending time with my family, and my family is hugely important to me. And and my friends who are like family, and they are the ones who really keep me in touch with like, have you done this yet? Or have you done that? Maybe you should think about this. And, especially like life is, especially living in the city, there's just so much. And
yeah, well, that was going to be kind of my next question is you can see throughout your work that you support a lot of Indigenous entrepreneurs and designers. Can you speak to maybe some of the challenges that you face living here in Toronto as an Indigenous entrepreneur, designer? What does that, because I'm new to Toronto, I don't even know what that looks like. Well, I know what it looks like as an Indigenous person, but not specific to the city.
Specific to the city. I was thinking about this today because I was recently asked the question. It's like, what's your Indigenous experience? Because we have this issue with, making sure people are who they say they are, right? And so I have to talk about where I come from. And I was born and raised in Toronto, and there weren't many resources available. So what I saw were a lot of our people who were just having to take a lot of risks, doing things like with so many resources, well, as resourceful as possible with as little resources that are available. And the spaces that happened in was in the social services and was in the arts. So I spent a huge amount of time in those areas. And that's how I was able to build a sense of community. So I think building that sense of community is great because, in Toronto, it's a diaspora of Indigenous people. Unless you are from the nations that are from here, right? It's like just this big gathering. So being in the city, I think it's really important to ground yourself with a sense of community. There are lots of activities that are happening. And so I think connecting within those kinds of groups and being open to like, what is the community here? But also as an entrepreneur, it's hard, it's very expensive. And again, it goes back to like being resourceful, which I think are, we're resilient people and that we have it in us. But I do believe that groups like IFA, platforms like IFA help to move the economy forward and the industry forward so that we are putting money back into our communities so that it's not always that struggle and that we're able to build generational wealth. Yeah, at this point, I'm really focused on like making sure we've got those strong communities here that are supportive of each other so that we are able to look at different opinions and ideas for what this industry looks like, industry in quotes, because I feel like we're building it as we keep going.
And do you feel like the industry is now shifting to support more Indigenous entrepreneurs? Like, what's the other side of that? Like, what does the opportunities look like for us today versus maybe like a few years ago?
Things have changed so much in the last 10 years, even 5 years. There really weren't supports for IFA when we first applied for arts funding because fashion wasn't considered art. And it's still not in a mainstream sense. Like this is something that we have encouraged within our community that fashion is art. And we've demonstrated it. All of our community does, right? So it's those kinds of, I guess, things that can help with that.
Speaking of like the future of art, like we talked a little bit about how things are shifting. Hopefully fashion is seen as an art form. When you think of the concept of like Indigenous futurisms, do you think fashion will be a staple part of that?
Yes. Okay, I learned that a kayak was actually considered an item of clothing. When the Inuit were making it, right? Like it was made out of seal skin. Yeah. And that would have been like, because it would have been something you put on, right? So it's this clothing. And so when I think about Indigenous futurisms, I think about such like important and innovative inventions like the kayak, which was an item of clothing. So in the future, if we are creating these spaces for each other, and investing in our work, investing in the economy of our work, I think that we will have that space within ourselves and like give that space gives us time for healing, to be able to just move forward and actually innovate.
That's so cool. I did carry a kayak once, and now that you're saying, I'm like, that could be that could be a whole look. I know you're working with so many Indigenous designers and entrepreneurs. Do you have an example of someone that's doing, like, you're just super inspired by the way that they do business, the way that they stay true to their values as an Indigenous person? Like, who are you inspired within the fashion industry within our community right now?
Oh man, it's always so hard to like to pinpoint these. Chelsea's doing really amazing work at Annie Hello. Yeah. The way that she's including the community, but also she is taking like the commercial approach, I think, and I've not even seen the insides of what her business model is like, but it looks to be very successful. I mean, it does look like there are challenges along the way, but getting to see the business model that she's using to be able to maintain her work, but also include other designers has been really inspiring. Also, I really love and so profoundly respect the organizers at Attica, which is a festival in NWT. They maintain such a grounded connection to community and the way that they present their festival. I mean, they are an NWT, so it's not a major city like Toronto, but when you go to that festival, it does feel very grounded and grassroots in a comforting kind of way, not a lesser value kind of way, you know? So definitely would recommend checking out Attica and the way that they're programming their work. They present lots of designers there. They actually bring together this whole tent where like all the designers, all they do is beadwork. Oh, because cool. most artists are working alone. So I just love that idea of bringing together all those artists to be able to just be together and talk about, okay, what are we doing? What's going to happen?
I feel like it's always shifting too a little bit. I mean, our traditions don't shift as much, but I feel like we're also very adaptable people and we kind of adapt with the timelines that we're on. And I know we spoke to people that are doing it right within the industry, but on the opposite end of that, for example, in my brief, I have this photo of like people that may not be doing it completely right.
Oh, this is TLC.
For example, so lately online, we've been seeing an increase of Indigenous fashion, air quotes, worn by, non-Indigenous people can wear some of our things that we design, but there's also been an appropriation of our designs. And so for those of you who can't see this, it's actually Beyonce's latest trends, this is TLC's recent red carpet. Is this the photo you have? Yeah. TLC. Okay. So do you feel like, first off, what would you consider cultural appropriation and then what is not? Because oftentimes, I don't know about your socials, but I often get asked from non-Indigenous people like, can I wear this? Is it okay to wear this? And I know some things are dependent on where that thing, what that garment is, what's it about. So how would you define cultural appropriation and what is your take on non-Indigenous people like wearing beaded earrings?
Cultural appropriation it's a power imbalance. I mean, appropriation happens everywhere all the time. But for me, when it is an issue is when prominent groups who have exploited entire groups, colonized them, and are taking their stuff and benefiting from it and not giving back to the communities, like that is the detrimental, I guess, form of cultural appropriation. So when I'm seeing people in the mainstream who are wearing Indigenous and like usually it's Plains Indians kind of inspired things that are not made by Indigenous people, like these people have clearly not done their research. They've not made the effort to work with the community. They're just doing things so that they can look a certain way and gain more prominence. And so that's where I see the issue. If people are working with Indigenous artists and designers, we are probably not going to lead you down a path to wear something inappropriate. I mean, unless there's like a vendetta.
Totally.
just kidding.
Jokes. We got you.
No, you are. We got you. Yeah, like. That is like working with Indigenous, like directly with Indigenous people is you're going to learn and like going to events like our festival, IFA Festival, or Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week. Like that's where you will get to meet and work with Indigenous designers and plus it'll look so much better.
Yeah.
Like, that's a thing.
Well, like I think someone that I'm currently inspired by is Naomi Glasses, who did that collaboration with Ralph Lauren. She did those 2 seasonal drops so far. They're very beautiful. The last one was super colorful, speaks to where she comes from. What are your thoughts around collaborations like that?
There's a lot of conversation that and work around this kind of thing, because there are collaborations that just go sideways all the time, and they are at the expense of the designers. In most instances, the Indigenous people are the ones that have lesser means. It's like a David and Goliath kind of situation. Like, I've worked with Canada on like best practices of working with Indigenous people and making sure your collaboration is fair. And like, there's like, these almost become a terms of reference before you even enter into those kinds of collaborations and relationships. And that's something I strongly encourage to other designers who ask me, like, I have this opportunity, what do you think? I'm like, you have to make sure that those terms are laid down, that there is an understanding of what the creative freedom is, who's doing the marketing, how much are you getting paid, who's doing the work. Like, there's all of these considerations that are not usually taken into account because, well, we're so excited, and rightfully so, right? And, we work in a community where you don't expect people to screw you over. But actually, like, the industry is cutthroat. They don't care about that stuff. And unless it's down on paper and signed, like, you're probably going to find yourself in a problem. So I definitely recommend checking out those kinds of documents that exist. Like, if you go to the Canada website or even to IFA's website, we have those kind of documents there so that people can reference them. And it's just a matter of working with them. So we're working on a collaboration right now with Roots and Justin Lewis at Section 35.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, and
That's
we're
awesome.
really, really excited. It'll be launched. Thank you. Well, I mean, we've just facilitated the partnership, but Justin is like the creative visionary behind it. And these are all factors that, like, as IFA facilitating this relationship, we ensure that Justin's needs are being met and that he's happy with how things are moving forward, that he doesn't feel like he's being pressured or cornered or, all these different things that can happen in a collaboration. And
so you're kind of like a bridge between like the Indigenous designer and then who they're working with, the brand?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, this is specifically as also a sponsorship for our festival. So we do get very creative and like, how are we working together? Because we want to get the most out of them to be supporting our community. And Roots has just been really lovely to work with. And, they call themselves a Canadian heritage brand, but on Justin's work, he's got something that, he's got home on native land,
right?
Which is that's pretty brave of a brand like Roots to go and put on their Canadian heritage brand, Canadian heritage, right? And so these are the kinds of dialogue that we can really advocate for, and like these kinds of approaches, and we can advocate for the designers in these ways.
And for the designers that are kind of advocating for themselves, like, what would your advice be for the younger Indigenous designers that are maybe wanting to have these conversations, but also like want to remain in integrity with who they are? What would your advice be to the younger Indigenous designers out there?
I guess there's so much, but I would go back to like building a really strong sense of community. Sometimes I find myself in situations where I'm like, what do I do? I'm in a really tough situation. I don't even know the first place to start of like, how do I make this choice? And so I do like consult with the advisors and mentors that I have in my life. And that's only been through building up, they call it network, you build up your network, right? And it's this idea of networking, but these are people that I trust deeply, like profoundly trust these people in my life to be able to go with them to tough questions that may be confidential, or, just having these kinds of conversations, I think, is just making sure that you have a trusted group of people and reaching out, to those advisors who are your senior. I think there's a lot to be learned. I think, especially the younger people, they are coming with such great ideas and like very innovative and open and cool ideas. And then there's the actual implementation of it and the actual knowledge of the industry, of how the industry works. And so that's where it becomes helpful to have that more senior advisory, is they come with experience, say this could happen or that could happen, consider this, consider that, because, we've been through a lot, and it's not about saying you have to do things this way, but it's more about just I was raised and my parents would always tell me to keep my wits about me.
Yeah.
So that's what I feel like I'm saying is like, just make sure you
Yeah.
got a good group around you and keep your wits about you. Yeah.
That's so important. And that also gets that like collective aspect to it. And one young person I think of that has been super inspirational lately is Quanah Chasing Horse. I mean, with her look at the Met Gala. And I think she recently did one too, another one, right? She did a second one.
She just did not Chanel. It was it Chloe? I can't remember all the big brands, but it was like this really big sustainability kind of advertisement that was really incredible. But I was fortunate enough, I got to speak on a panel with her mother in Geneva around intellectual property around Indigenous fashion. And they were just talking about that, like living on the land and the traditional upbringing and what that means in these more mainstream spaces. And so there's just a huge amount of integrity in the way that she's making her choices, from my understanding.
Yeah. And I love how she represents like Indigenous designers and beadwork artists like on red carpets. And I'm curious what your thoughts are around seeing quote unquote indigeneity represented at places like the Met Gala.
I think it's great. You know, we've seen the big one that comes to mind right now is the Oscars, you know, with Lily Gladstone. And when I saw that dress I had like 200 quilled patches, I guess, that were put on there. And all I could think about was like, because I know these events. Yeah. These events usually like the stylists are contacting the designers with like 2 weeks notice, a month, and they want like 200 hand quilt things. It's like, that is literally impossible. So I'm like, how is that working right now? Right. But I think it's great. It just shows the importance of Indigenous fashion across sectors and like the opportunities to, again, grow our economy and the visibility of the Indigenous designers who are creating those works. And when it's our community members on those red carpets, we get to control that narrative.
That's true.
So I think that's is super, super important. I just don't want to see people presenting us and they're not even of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it speaks to like so many other people's stories when you're wearing that work. And I know we mentioned what you're doing on a local level throughout Toronto, but I know you've taken IFA on the global stage as well. Could you speak a little? Because last time you were headed to White Milano. And how was that experience for you? And also, how has that transitioned from like, transitioning to like more of a global stage for Indigenous fashion?
Again, there's so many opportunities, and it also allows, especially in these fashion capitals like Milan or London, New York, Tokyo. What is our presence in there? How are we actively a part of the industry on our terms? And so, getting to go to White Milano, which is the largest trade show, buyer trade show in Milan, which is a part of Milan Fashion Week, and we brought a group of 7 designers, and one of them was a mentee on the project to get to just have the experience. And it was our first time there, but it was really big. It was so different from anything that we had ever experienced before. And so it was important that we went with a group of designers, so everyone could support each other, just because of the sheer scale of that space. We wanted to make sure that we were represented in a really great light, that everyone felt supported, that everyone didn't feel like they had to go too big and beyond their resources. So get going as a group, again, really helps to manage what we have available to us. It was also important to us to make sure that we were doing education and awareness. So as IFA, that becomes our work, so the designers can focus on selling their work, which is standard for many different kinds of artists, right? Whereas we can deal with all of the questions like appropriation. Can I wear this? All this kind of thing. So we did a panel discussion to talk about that work, and we had Justin Lewis and Robin McLeod sit on that panel, because they both bring very, very different perspectives on Indigenous fashion. Justin is very commercial and mainstream, and Robin, she lives on the land, NWT, and is harvesting all of her hides and working with natural materials. And so getting to share those perspectives with a very mainstream audience was exciting, and we are planning to be back there next year as a part of our trade program. Yeah, I'm really, really excited, because it's actually launched us to be able to build a trade program. So we'll be able to work with a group over whatever, like a year long to bring them to Milan, but also go to New York and go to Tokyo, fingers crossed, to just open up these opportunities and make sure that we've got that global presence. And there's Indigenous people everywhere, literally in all of these countries. I mean, not in Europe, but well, I don't know. That's another conversation, but like, how are we building our global community? So by us going international, not only are we connecting our community with international industry, we're also building an Indigenous fashion industry. And you can see that having been done through film. I was working in film in 2004 when it looked basically to what fashion looks like today for Indigenous people. And now we are seeing our people at the Oscars, right? As actors, as filmmakers, as producers. Like, let's make that happen for fashion.
All right. So Jacqueline Jennings' question for you is, what is one way businesses can support Indigenous designers in a transformational way, whether they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous?
Hire us. Yeah, really. I think reaching out and hiring Indigenous designers and also paying the fees that are appropriate of Indigenous fashion.
And what about IFA specifically? Would you say like sponsor or like donate? Or?
Oh, yeah. I would definitely say if people want to support us by sponsoring us, that would be amazing. We are also working on releasing a donor campaign. So we're hoping to get a lot of support that way. We are focused on building stability, building longevity, and building generational wealth, because I am so tired of having nothing to fall back onto. And I want to change that.
And what would your question be for Cynthia, who's the founder of Imaginative?
Cynthia Lickers Sage, how do you maintain longevity?
Any other ways that listeners can support you and all the work that you're doing?
Oh my gosh, I'd say buy from Indigenous designers. Go check out our website, indigenousfashionarts.com, and check out the artists that we present. There's just such a big community doing all kinds of work for all kinds of people of all different backgrounds and lived experiences. And so I think that is really the best way to support IFA, is actually to support the industry as a whole.
And supporting the industry as a whole, who made your earrings?
These are Heather Dixon.
Okay.
I stole them from my sister.
I know. I got these given to me in the city.
I love them. I love the texture on the white there.
Right?
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
Well, make sure y'all check out the vendors too at the Toronto Fashion Arts, because the last year, oh my gosh, I actually bought one of my bags here, from there. It's so beautiful. But thank you so much, Sage, for coming on here for the second time, sharing a little bit more about your vision and all your good work. I know the community is very inspired by everything that you're doing. And my hands are raised too.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love getting to chat with you.